But yeah, so why am I here? I'm here to initiate a conversation. I don't have a heck of a lot of answers for you, but I am here to initiate a conversation. When it comes to conversations about mental health, I'm not a professional, but I'm willing to share with you a few experiences that I've had over the past couple of years as I've been training to become a ski guide. I'm a little nervous about it. So one thing that I am willing to do, obviously, is be pretty vulnerable about some experiences that I've been involved in. Like I say, I want to initiate a conversation. So whether or not you're willing to expose your own personal failures in this world, you can now use my experiences that I'm about to present to you as a starting point for conversations that I'd like the entire industry to be having, amongst your teams and with each other. I think that I'm going to have 3 types of audience members. I think I'm going to have people that the content that I'm about to give you, people will really identify strongly with it. I think there's going to be people in the audience that can hear me, but don't necessarily want to take part in the conversation. And I also think there's going to be people who the information that I have to say brings up or triggers a bit of resistance for them. And no matter where you fit in, I think it's really important that maybe we consider how our reaction or why our reactions are coming up for us. And then just think critically, think critically about why it is that we had those reactions and what we might want to do with them on a go forward basis. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of experiences that I've had. So in 2014, I was involved in an avalanche fatality. I'm not going to go into detail at all about what happened that day, but I do want to talk about what I lost. I lost more than just my friend. I lost my ease and my innocence in the mountains. I lost my ability to be ignorant about the bad times, right? So arriving home after that accident, I felt pretty numb. I knew that I should have been really sad. I heard that I might have been angry. There was a lot of emotions that are being tossed around of ways that I should be expressing myself, but I really felt numb. I didn't feel anything. That happened in the spring, so I, quit skiing for the summer. But ultimately, I'm a skier. I love skiing. So I had to get back into it in the following fall. And instead of going back into backcountry skiing like I'd loved up until that point, I was terrified of that. So I thought I would lean into my competitive freeride career and train more in the freeride space. And I also was aware of the fact that I was afraid of backcountry skiing. So I thought a great way of alleviating that fear would be to take some courses and to do some practicums. And I tried to expose myself to as many types of mentorship and styles of guiding as possible in order to see if something would fit a little bit better for me. So I kept that up for a couple of years. And eventually I tore my ACL, which actually turned out to be probably the most ideal physical manifestation of that fear that I could have experienced, because with a torn ACL, I could still link up a few turns up at the ski hill, but I couldn't backcountry ski or guide. But I don't know if you've torn your ACLs in your career, but there's quite a community of us in the ski community. So it actually gave me a bit of camaraderie in the ski community, which is what I needed at the time. But as I was going into surgery, I was afraid of surgery. So I thought to myself, I'm going to engage in sports psychology, because that's going to be about mindset and getting back that competitive edge and that sort of thing. So I thought that was a safe way to get back into my career as a skier. But if anyone here has taken any therapy in their lives, it's not about that entirely. This was going to be about me, my experiences, my relationships, my childhood. And so we dug pretty deep into my relationship with skiing. And it took me 9 months to actually admit to him that I was involved in a fatality that was the trigger for all of these things that I was experiencing in my life at that point. And so with my physical recovery, I was starting to recover a little bit mentally through that process, which was great. and I decided to take some guide courses. And during an early season guide course, I had a transceiver exam. And during that exam, I was blessed with the biggest breakthrough of my recovery. So what that looked like was a physical flashback. And so during that exam, a few seconds into the exam, I realized that was the first sense of urgency that I'd experienced on snow since the accident that I was involved in. So up until that point, transceivers really weren't a trigger for me. I wasn't involved in the transceiver search on the day of the accident. I didn't see it coming. And so it has been suggested to me that had I seen it coming, I would have armored up against it, and I wouldn't have allowed it to happen. So I might have passed my transceiver exam had I been able to do that. But unfortunately, I failed my transceiver exam by 23 seconds. And so not only was I disappointed by the result, but I was overcome with a sense of guilt because I know how important it is that we exercise our rescue skills at the best possible capacity, right? And so within that guilt, I ended up at the end of the day, back at my car. I had the longest, deepest, strongest, most healing cry of my life. And what happened for me in that moment was, rather than calling it a breakdown, which I would have up until that point called it, I've learned to rephrase that as a breakthrough, because for me, that was the single most important part of my recovery and the biggest success of my recovery from PTSD. Up until that point, I was having trouble sleeping. I was obviously terrified to be able to do things that come pretty naturally to me. I had symptoms consistent with PTSD, and it was stuff that I was working on. And also, like I said, that feeling of numbness, it lingered with me for 3.5 years. 3.5 years, I was unable to cry about the loss that I experienced on that day of that accident. Because what I'd been doing for years is taking all of those emotions that scared the out of me, and I, without knowing, was burying them because I couldn't go there. I was too scared, and I didn't know that that was the situation that I was in. And so in that moment of having a flashback and failing my transceiver exam, I failed in the context of a ski guide, but it was, like I said, one of the greatest success stories of my recovery. And maybe if I was able to compartmentalize my fear that day, I would have passed the exam. But at what cost? Because all of these symptoms were still resonating in my personal life, right? So fast forward to last spring, and I was heading into a guides exam. 3 weeks before the exam, my sister-in-law was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And she was in Toronto at one of the leading glioblastoma facilities in the world. And they let us know that her tumor was one of the most aggressive cases they'd ever seen. And so we had talked about me going into this exam. And while she was still verbal, she told me that she really wanted to see me complete the exam. She was one of my best friends. She knew that in 2020, the exam was deferred because of COVID. She knew that I'd been training for 2 years now. She knew that it had been a long-term goal of mine. And she really thought that I deserved it. And so I went to the exam, and I let my examiners know what was happening. So every single day, I'd wake up fresh in the morning. I'd have breakfast, I'd check the weather, I'd go to the guides meeting, we'd make a plan for the day. We'd go out in the field, we'd execute the plan, and then we'd come home, I'd have dinner, and I'd call my husband, and I would hear in agonizing detail how her condition was progressing, what they were experiencing in the hospital, and yeah, life on that side. 6 days into my exam, I came home to the news that my sister passed away. 2 days after that, during a mid-course evaluation, one of my instructors told me that sometimes things happen in life and we need to be able to show up to work. This didn't feel like one of those things. And I actually had done a great job of showing up to work. And in my evaluation, I had performed above standard on many of the elements that I needed in order to pass the exam. But for me, it became pretty unforgivable for me to not show up as myself during that exam. I was unable to smile the way that I smile. I was unable to ski for the reasons we ski and really do it all, you know? So in that context, I had what we could perceive and even I identify as a guiding success, but it was at the same time as a tremendous personal failure. So ideally in life, we're going to learn to balance both of these things, right? So for me in these two circumstances, I had one instance where I had a guiding failure, personal success, and another instance where I had a guiding success and a personal failure. So, like I said, I don't really have any answers when it comes to how to balance those things. But in this industry, I mean, we're predisposed to trauma. It happens. Of course, we need to learn how to compartmentalize things to do our job on a day-to-day basis. And that's extremely important. And it's extremely important that we show up as the definition of ski guide that we've all come to know. But I think it's really important that we put a lot of critical thought into how we unpack those events once they're compartmentalized. And I'd personally love to see more conversation about that sort of thing. I'm starting to learn when I get to my max. I was totally, completely, and absolutely maxed out during the entirety of my guides exam last year. And because of that, some of the emotional stuff that came up for me, anger being the biggest one, was right at the surface the entire time for me. So on our day-to-day basis as ski guides or avalanche practitioners, you know, if we're triggered to that extent while we're doing our job, we need to be able to do something to back away and lessen the intensity, right? And I'm really glad to hear that amongst the entire industry, the talk of mental health is becoming a lot more prominent. But I might suggest that as we start to implement these boundaries on mental health, it might not be so flawless on the other side. We have a lot of operational pressures. We have personal financial pressures and just a lot of stress in our day-to-day. And so we've gotten to the point where we're starting to idolize the people that can maintain that the longest, right? But really all that does is reset our definition of normal. It's not human to stay at that state for so long. So as I've reiterated many times, I don't have the answer to this, but I think the really important question to ask is how do we create that sort of space to cushion the blow? When we all need a day off from time to time, what's that going to look like? How are we going to be able to integrate it? Those are the sorts of background systems that we need to start to integrate in order to help each other so that we don't meet those breakdowns, breakthroughs, hopefully. So really that's it for me. That's all that I have to share with you. I just wanted to start that conversation. Whether you identify with what I was saying or it triggers any sort of resistance for you, I just think that it's incredibly important that you have these types of conversations within your team so that you're aware of that sort of thing when they're happening and understand that we all have extenuating circumstances that come up in life and that, you know, it's worth it to maybe dig a little deeper with each other and find out what's going on, because we have very, very sophisticated defense mechanisms that don't even allow us to see it in ourselves. So I hope that these conversations take place. I would love to be involved in them. And I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to talk to you about it. Thank you.